Welcome to the Wire to Wire podcast. As always, it's me, your host Yusuf. Now, without further ado, let's just get right to it. So recently there's been a lot of drama and back and forth in sports media involving the comments made by Stephen A. Simp, as we like to call him around here, and what he said about Max Kellerman on the Joe Budden podcast. Now, for those who may not know, Max Kellerman used to be a co-host with him on ESPN's show First Take. However, Stephen A., by his own admission, got Max fired. And he was basically bragging and flexing about having that done on the show. And this led to Stephen A. Simp eventually having a back and forth with Terrell Owens, a former wide receiver in the NFL, and a Hall of Fame player too. And we're going to briefly get into their little back and forth exchange later. But for this episode, I don't really want to discuss Stephen A. Simp or his character. In the last episode that I did, I broke all of that stuff down based on the storyline that was happening at that time. And, guys like Marcellus Wiley, many other guys on YouTube, they did a great job of already breaking all of that stuff down. So I'll defer to them and let you guys watch what they have to say in regards to that. But when I watched Marcellus Wiley's video telling the story about essentially what happened, about how Max Kellerman was actually smarter than Stephen A., and that eventually led to him feeling threatened by his intelligence and the amount of clout and respect that he was getting within the black community. For some reason, hearing him speak about it, it reminded me of this book by Robert Greene called The 48 Laws of Power. I have a copy of it right here. Now, I read this book a long time ago, back when I was in university. And periodically since that time, I would go back and I would reread it, or I would just revisit some chapters. But this book basically breaks down certain principles. And then when I heard him discuss Max Kellerman's situation with Stephen A., I thought there were some laws that were discussed in this book that are, I believe, applicable in life in certain situations, particularly when you're dealing in professional settings. And anecdotally, I've even had some experiences that were happening to me at certain points that I realized could actually be tied to some of the laws that are mentioned in this book. And in those situations, I made some adjustments accordingly, and it actually ended up working. So the issues that Max Kellerman faced, as Marcellus was breaking this stuff down, it reminded me of this book, and I thought it would make for a good episode. So I would like to break all of it down while incorporating certain laws from the book. But before we continue, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now first, I just want to play you guys a brief clip from the intelligible Marcellus Wiley, and then when we come back, I'll tie it to the book.
But now we got a problem, because you got Max Kellerman in there who's supposed to go with the flow on these conversations or defer in these societal black issues as they're coming up, the Colin Kaepernick conversation. Oh, we're going to walk through this. And that ain't Max Kellerman. That never was Max Kellerman. And I think that Stephen A., because he gave him that opportunity, as you know, Stephen A., when he give you opportunity, he also going to say, hey, you my subordinate. You stay in your lane. I hooked you up. I got you. Stay there. Max wasn't going to stay there. Or at least Max tried not to stay there. And that's what happened. That's how this all started. This all started from a guy who was so intelligent, it brought back some of those insecurities from Stephen A. And a guy who would not back down on those issues and actually outshine Stephen A. in the same issues that he wanted to conquer so that he could not only be the king, but also the voice of the people. This ain't Skip Bayless sitting next to you now, a white guy who's like, head nodding on the black issues, head nodding on the societal issues, letting you just speak and just whatever you say, hey, it's the way it goes. Not Max. Max will break down some old ass history on you. He bring it back to the day where you're like, and then all of a sudden what you have to do now is two things. One, kick in overdrive and being the entertainer, because you can't out-educate them on this one. You're not going to out-articulate them on this. But two.
So you saw what he had to say. And there's two laws in particular that really stood out to me. So the first law, and ironically, it's actually the first law in this book, is never outshine the master. Now, the premise behind this law, and I'm reading and quoting directly from the book, is always make those above you feel comfortably superior. In your desire to please or impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite. Inspire fear and insecurity. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the height of power. So there's quite a bit to unpack there, but let's break it down. So it's very obvious in their dynamic that Max was the far smarter personality, and he didn't even hide it. Now, this is a challenge in and of itself, because on one hand, you don't want to hold yourself back and lower yourself, but on the other hand, you don't want to make enemies unnecessarily and have a target on your back either. So this is tricky waters to navigate. And that's why it's important to assess these situations and apply certain principles only when they're necessary. Now, obviously, everything that I'm saying in this episode and even what's being mentioned in the book, this is not universal. It must be done. It's a case-by-case thing, so it must be done at certain times. And it is all based on circumstances and situations. So in 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene makes a distinction that this is only to be applied, and I'm quoting directly from the book, but a master firm in his position. But here's the thing. You're not dumbing yourself down or dimming your light or even belittling yourself when you implement something like this. If anything, it actually shows a high level of intelligence, right? Because you're able to get in the psyche of a person that you're dealing with, and you're able to get what it is that you're after without drawing any suspicion or negative attention to yourself, right? So obviously you're going to do the work that is necessary and be patient and play the game, but it's about strategy, which takes a lot of intelligence. So again, you're not really dumbing yourself down. But let me give you a practical example that you could look at, right? So there's many people out there, or maybe even most people, that would prefer to just go to work, do what they have to do, and then go home. And some of you watching this, you may have managers or supervisors, or you may have had those people at some point, right, at a company, and you notice that they don't really know as much as you, or they really aren't as smart as you, or even as educated as you, or just flat out they don't understand certain things that you do. But because they might have the right relationships or they might have seniority, they're in a leadership position. Now, if that person was to view you as a threat, because, let's be real here. Most people are aware enough to know who is actually smarter than them or knows more than them. And that person, right, that manager or that supervisor, whatever the case may be, they can make your job more difficult than it needs to be. And they may even aim to do the exact same thing that Stephen A. eventually did with Max. Now, it's annoying to have that kind of target on your back, and it can create an unnecessarily hostile work environment. So, how do you navigate it? Well, you have to fend off the suspicion. So, for example, let's just say you're working on something or you're performing a role, and you already know how to do something, right? Every now and then, not often, but on certain occasions, you ask for help or a reminder on how to do something from the person that is in power, or you seek their feedback. And you could do something like this every 3 weeks or maybe even a month, right? You just ask them for that help, you ask them for that feedback, or you ask them for some kind of advice. Now, obviously, you don't want to ask too much. You don't want to ask too much because you don't want to come off as incompetent, and you also don't want to come off like you're kind of angling for their spot. You know what I mean? So you want to ask like small, simple things that'll be just enough to make them feel that there's something that they could teach you or something that they could help you with, right? And that can reaffirm their power. And why it's important to reaffirm their power is because A, you're doing it in a subtle way that shows that you still need their help for something, while at the same time, you're not really coming off as someone who is incompetent, right? So in that person's mind, you just validated them and reinforced their power. And you've also shown that you have a willingness to learn, right? And that you're willing to accept coaching, you're willing to accept feedback, you're willing to accept the help, and you're proactive in asking for the help. So this is a win-win for everybody, right? And in doing so, that will disarm them and it will prevent a target from being on your back, or altogether it will just take the target off your back, right? And if you're ever doing those one-on-one performance review sessions, that can be a golden opportunity to say that, you know, you're glad to be working with them, you want to learn from them, and maybe develop eventually some type of mentor-mentee type of dynamic with them, right? Now, maybe you're interested in that kind of stuff, or maybe you're not. Regardless of what the case may be, is that you're at least allowing them to see that you're actually on their side and you're not a threat to their power. Now, I'm not saying that this is something that's going to work all the time, but I'm just giving you an example of how it can be applied, you know, based on my own interpretation. Bottom line is that people who are in positions of power, they want their power to be validated, recognized, and respected. And what I just shared with you guys are some subtle tactics that can be used. Now, in this book here, when he's discussing this law, he's using, you know, examples regarding Galileo and the Medici family, as well as King Louis and his finance minister. But I'm just trying to give a more modern, contemporary example that I think will resonate with, you know, with you guys. So, in this scenario of Max Kellerman, he essentially upstaged Stephen A. Simp time and time again, right? Now with Max, he's in a tough spot because he's on TV, you know, it's the entertainment show business, and of course they're debating. So he can't, you know, throw debates just to let Stephen A. win, right? But behind the scenes, away from the camera, maybe he could have tried subtle tactics that could have, you know, warded off those suspicions, or maybe helped ease a lot of the insecurities that Stephen A. Simp had towards him. Or maybe Max Kellerman didn't really care to, or maybe he was doing that already and it just didn't work, right? Like I said, none of this is absolute and a guarantee. Some people are just difficult to work with, and no matter what you do, it just will never work. But again, I'm just sharing with you guys information and my thoughts on this whole storyline. And, you know, with that being said, another law that crossed my mind was Law 26. And this is keep your hands clean. Now, going on different platforms and flexing that you got a man fired, to me, is very disgusting. Rather than playing ignorant and saying, well, look, the bosses upstairs, they made the decision. It was out of my control. No matter what I said, this is what they wanted to do. See, that could have at least been a good cover to show that he didn't get his hands dirty and did this to the man. But instead, he openly bragged about it, right? And then he's insulting the dude, right? And on a side note, he's saying that this guy's not really a journalist and he was never really an athlete. Bruh, neither were you. You were never an athlete. No matter how much you may think you were one, you were not an athlete, okay? You averaged less than 1.4 points per game in high school by your own admission. But you were not an athlete. So let's get that out of the way. And it's even questionable whether or not you're a journalist. I give you credit, right? You did a lot of work to get to where you are now, but what you do is not journalism. I don't think at any point you were a journalist. You were a journalist. You were very salacious in your reporting, but I cannot say that you were a journalist because you always had an agenda. But that's a side note. Again, go check out that other episode that I did. I broke some of that stuff down. But back to the original story at hand, it further solidifies that he's not trustworthy and he's not someone that people would want to work with, right? And, you know, I know right now him and Shannon Sharp, come on, Skip. Oh, I'm sorry, Stephen A.
Because here's the thing, Skip.
Steve. Hey! It's all right. It's okay, my man. It's all right. 7 years, bro. It's okay. Don't listen. Don't worry about the troll. Steve,
don't break that bracelet, though. That's what I'm more concerned about.
Stephen A.
Right? I know right now they're having their little bromance and they're in their honeymoon phase of working together. But my personal prediction is I would say give it 6 months to a year before they start to have heated disagreements, and then eventually it just doesn't work out between them. But to openly admit that you fired someone and to talk like it is a good thing, I believe is only going to hurt Stephen A in the long run. I just personally don't see his tenure at ESPN ending well for him. But this is the kind of stuff that ruins your reputation. Because now, if they didn't already, they are certainly not going to take you seriously. And you're already seeing this on the internet. And this is where Terrell Owens comes in. So people are clowning him for what he did, and they're looking at him despicably, right? And why did he do what he did? Is because he felt compelled to do this because his power or his conceived power was in question. So when Terrell Owens said this comment,
you mentioned obviously Max is going to get in here, and like I said, I'm in the streets. Max almost seems blacker than you, Stephen A. with what he's coming, you know, with his commentary.
With all due respect, my brother.
I'm just saying, dog.
Wait a minute. Wait to finish.
I'm just saying.
I'm gonna check you right now. You don't cross the line.
I'm just saying.
Tell me. Wait a minute. You don't cross the line. First of all.
So when he said that, combined with the already existing insecurities and inadequacies that he had towards a guy like Max, the writing was on the wall, right? He already had those things leading up to that moment, and when Terrell Owens made that comment, which was really in jest, that sealed the deal and reaffirmed all of the insecurities that he already had. So, again, like I said, for Max, the writing was on the wall. It was not a matter of if, but a matter of when. So, like I mentioned earlier, if Stephen A. Simp was actually smart, he would say, well, the boss has told me this is what they're going to do. There was nothing I could have said or done to change their mind. This was all out of my hands. It was beyond my control. But instead, he's flexing and taking full responsibility that he got this man fired. And it already further cements what people believe about him, that he's an untrustworthy person. Now look at what he did to Allen Iverson back in 2010, right? Look at that scenario. Look at this scenario that's happening right now. Look at how he treated Kyrie Irving just a couple of years ago. Go back and watch the last episode that I did. Even now, at this point, he's talking shit about Skip Bayless every chance that he gets. And this is the same guy who said Skip Bayless was like a brother to him. And Skip was actually the one that got him a job at ESPN in 2011, right? After ESPN fired Stephen A. Simp in the mid-2000s. So he pushed to get this guy on the show as his co-host and got him that job again. And look at his podcast. Every chance he gets to shit on a guy like Skip, he does it. So the word is already out about this guy. And that kind of ties into a law that I want to mention. You know, just as an honorable mention, I'm not going to dive too deep into it because it's already self-explanatory, but it's law number 5. So much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. So like I said, I don't see his tenure at ESPN ending very well for him, right? The higher you get built up, usually the harder the fall if you're not careful. And what he's doing is he's burned a lot of bridges, and he's continuing to do that. And people are not going to feel sorry for him when that time comes. And you have to understand, he is 55 years old. So it'll be very hard to redeem yourself and rebrand yourself at this stage in your life after spending nearly 3 decades burning as much bridges as you have. But anyways, this whole storyline reminded me of this book for some reason. And it's very interesting when something that you've read previously or something that you're currently reading is practically playing out in real time. Just something about it is interesting, and I think it speaks to how relevant a book is, how good a book is, and how practical it is. So this is definitely a great book by Robert Greene. Shout out to him. And that's really all I got for you guys today. You know, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You can also check out my 4 books. Speaking of books, you can check out my 4 books, and the link will be in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and TikTok. Yes, I'm on there posting clips from the podcast, but I think you guys will like it. Go check it out. But until next time.